Welcome to the Bovine Banter podcast with Penn State Extension Dairy Team. I'm Daniela Roland, and I'm a dairy educator based in Franklin County, Pennsylvania. Joining us today are first responders Steve Brown and Rob Nese. Thank you for being with us today, Steve and Rob. So to get us started, could you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your current role and your background? And Steve, I'll start with you.
Sure. Thanks for having us today. So a little bit about me. I currently work for Lancaster City Fire in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. I'm full-time there. Before that, I graduated from Penn State in 2015 in ag science major. And I really wasn't sure what direction I wanted to go with, but I knew that I had a passion for agriculture. And also I had some time in the volunteer fire service. So I was trying to figure out how I could combine those and move forward into a career that would incorporate both. And an opportunity came up at Penn State where I could work with the Ag Safety and Health team based out of University Park campus. So I was able to combine both of those passions, working with first responders and farm families to increase farm safety and agriculture and things like that. So it's a little bit about me and how I got into the small kind of niche of ag safety, but it's been great. Met a lot of great people and hopefully have been able to increase the awareness of farm safety.
All right, Rob, could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name is Rob Nese. I am currently the Assistant Chief of Special Operations for the Center Region Council of Governments Regional Fire Protection Program. That's a long title, but the Center Region Council of Governments is the governmental body that is formed by the municipalities surrounding Penn State's campus. So we support the Alpha Fire Company, which is the fire company in State College here. In my current role, I'm in charge of our hazmat team, but I get into a lot of technical rescue. So, oddly enough, my background in school was in turf science. So I was in the College of Ag actually in school, but through my current role, I'm not really doing anything in the ag field. But because of our job duties and technical rescue responsibilities in the area and the population of farmers and the agriculture that we have in the area, we end up running into some rescue scenarios having to do with agriculture and farm rescue. So I've slowly branched out into that and actually learned a lot of what I know from Steve here.
Okay, great. The first question is, in general, farm safety isn't always on the forefront until an incident happens. What suggestions do you have for farmers to identify common risks or hazards around the farms? And how can those farmers mitigate or eliminate the hazards? Steve, I'll let you go first with this one.
So a lot of times when we go out and work with farms, it's more of a family farm setting. And that's also something that's unique to agriculture is that it can incorporate a mix of heavy industry along with a family setting as well. So we can definitely see some unique hazards that are present that we wouldn't typically see in other industries where maybe we don't have family involved. We do get a lot of questions about how do we start with identifying problems on the farms. A lot of time we are so complacent just because we're around it every day that we may not even realize that we're working near hazards. So one thing that we talk about is like a hazard and risk analysis, or just something that you can do by walking around the farm and specifically looking at what hazards are present. It could be with your employees or with family members, and it might even just be like on a rainy day project where there's nothing really else going on, and we can just take a walk around the farm and look for things that could be dangerous to us. And you don't really need to have any special knowledge of that. Just kind of, we're looking to see what's there and how we can improve it. And then from there, we tell folks that you can kind of base it on a severity versus a frequency type of scale. So how often am I around this hazard? And if something does happen, how bad could it be for us? So that's a good way to rank where we address our safety needs. And a lot of times it can be low cost. It could just be some cheap improvements that make things better. That's one of our things that we offer up.
Okay, good. That's a good way for farmers to get started. Rob, do you have anything to add?
To sort of go off what Steve was saying, complacency is a huge thing. You know, a lot of the incidents that we run into aren't things that sprung on the person that got themselves into, you know, a sticky situation out of the blue. They're things that are always present. Most of these farmers aren't picking up new jobs once a year or getting into new equipment every year. They're doing the same thing over and over, and really understanding the risks of what you're doing and knowing the potential hazards and the signs of them is really paramount. And that's where everybody needs to start. But complacency plays a huge role in that. You know, the people that have been doing the same thing at a family farm for decades and decades, and in some cases, you know, over 100 years, techniques evolve, but the hazards that are there, many of them have been there since these farms started. And when it goes well for 99 years in a row, the 100th year isn't when you think something bad's going to happen. So, really, just understanding what hazards are present and knowing that those change throughout the year, you know, depending on the equipment that's being worked with, depending on the processes that are being done. There's some hazards that are present in the fall when, you know, harvests are being done and things are being stored for the winter and products are starting to ferment, and those aren't present in the winter or the spring possibly. So really just being aware and bringing that up to everybody that's working on the farm that, hey, during this season, using this type of equipment, these are the hazards that we're, you know, concerned about.
That's a great point. Yeah, especially thinking about it seasonally, and that's all good.
Yeah, and if I
Um,
could add on to that too, Rob, like
yeah,
you bring up a good point. The other unique thing about farming is that this is more of a family setting. So the people on the farm are more willing to take a higher risk to make things successful. Whereas in other industries, you know, you may not have such a burning desire, if you will, to be as successful. So this is really, they're really invested into the operation. So you see the people that are willing to go work the extra hours or take more of the, I guess you could say, the risk along with getting things done on time or successfully. So that's another area that we see where people may not recognize that they're pushing themselves beyond what they should be.
that's an excellent point too. So, what are some of the common reasons you're called out to a farm? Rob, could you take this one first?
Sure. I would say that there's no one common occurrence. They're all different. Some of them sort of come from the same category of maybe dealing with equipment or dealing with, you know, the toxic hazards that farming may present, but they're all unique. I'm by no means the most seasoned agricultural rescue technician in the world, but we've seen plenty of incidents in our area having to do with equipment, and they're always different, whether it's being stuck under a piece of equipment, stuck in a piece of equipment, being stuck around a piece of equipment, succumbing to toxic gases produced by a farming process. We've seen accidents with logging on farms. There's really no one common occurrence, but the common theme is, like Steve said, you know, people willing to risk a lot because it's a family business and it's just what they do to support their livelihood. And, you know, just always thinking it's not going to be me today. And it, you know, sometimes the right combination of the wrong things come together to make a situation bad.
That makes a lot of sense. Steve, do you have any thoughts there? Anything like that you'd like to add?
No, I agree with Rob. Typically, I would say the machinery or any equipment are the number one cause that requires us to come out to a farm, and that's because it doesn't matter what type of farm you go to, you're going to find some sort of equipment there, whether it's a dairy farm, a crop farm. And then the one unique thing about Pennsylvania agriculture specifically is that you could see equipment in all age ranges, and also being pulled by horse-drawn equipment all the way up to equipment right off the line that's, was designed, very recently. So there's such a wide variety of equipment on farms, and a lot of it comes down also to what maintenance was performed over the past use of the equipment. So A lot of times things get broken and shields get removed to fix that, and the shields may not go back on. So, that always can cause hazards too. So yeah, I would agree. Equipment is definitely one of the main culprits of farm incidents.
What would you like farmers to know from a first responder's perspective? Rob, would you take that
Uh,
one?
Sure. Really, that we care as much about their safety as they do. It's hard to sit here an armchair quarterback and you get to an incident and think, why didn't they do this? Why did they remove this? Maybe they had to get something done that day and a piece of equipment wasn't working the way it should have, and some corners needed to be cut. So it's tough to sit here or go to an incident, see what happened, and think, man, why didn't they do that? Or why did they do this? But there's an understanding that, we don't fully understand exactly what was going through someone's head when a bunch of things went wrong. Like I mentioned earlier, it takes a lot of the right combination of a lot of bad things happening. So you have one guard removed, or you're doing one thing, differently than you may normally do it. That's probably not going to cause an accident. Those start stacking up, and that's when accidents occur. So it's always tough going to any sort of scene like this and seeing someone in a precarious situation. And as much as they may not think so at the time, we genuinely care just as much as they do. And we don't want to be out there any more than they don't want to be in the situation that they're in. So, just really stressing that we're on the same page as them, and we'd like to see them do their best to prevent us from ever having to meet them, especially on those bad days.
Steve, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just to go off of that, one of the things that we see is that farmers will typically try to fix the problem before they call us for help. And that's just the nature of farmers. They are problem solvers. So typically, if they're calling us, there is something wrong. But one thing we like to stress is that the quicker that you call us, the sooner we can get resources going that direction. And hopefully, the quicker we can get care to the patient that's involved or anything that's going on. So, we always say, don't wait to call for help. We can start that way, and hopefully it will turn out okay on its own before we get there. But if not, we're on the way, and the time is going to be drastically shorter than waiting.
Sure, that makes sense. Switching gears a little bit, some first responders may not be that familiar with farming operations. So what can farmers do to assist first responders in farm emergencies? Steve, would you take this one first?
Sure. One thing that we encourage farmers to do, and first responders, is on like a weekly training night. So a lot of volunteer fire departments have a night a week that they designate to training. So we always encourage them set up a tour with a local farm, and we always say a dairy farm is best because you can find most of the hazards. You're going to find everything from the chemicals and fertilizers to the animals to the storage structures that Rob was mentioning about the farm gases. So find a farm in your first due area, and talk to the farmer and go out and just see if they can explain the operation to the first responders, and also explain the first responder side to the farmer. So if they're ever summoned to the farm for an emergency, like, they know what to expect from each other ahead of time. And it's not uncommon, and Rob can talk about this too. First responders do pre-plan. So for structures that are high hazards in our areas, we'll do a pre-plan ahead of time. So if we get dispatched, at 2 o'clock in the morning, we can quick pull up that information, and it's going to give us the details of what to look for. So that's something that we encourage them to do also, is just to have a rough idea about what to expect when they arrive, and some phone numbers of people to call that may know the operation better, at the late hours of the night, that they can get a hold of.
Okay, good. Those are good points. Rob, do you have anything else to add to that?
I mean, Steve basically took the words out of my mouth, and one of my big jobs with the fire company is pre-planning. When something happens, that's in the past. It happened, and now we have to unroll our plan of attack. And anything that we can do beforehand to make that go a little bit more smooth on scene, the difference between seconds or minutes can be huge. So us knowing the hazards is huge. The farmers knowing what we're doing is just as important, because if we go out to a farm and talk to them on an evening and do some pre-planning, of course, everybody thinks it's not going to happen to them, but then if it does happen, they may know, hey, they're going to be bringing this ladder truck in. I got to get this equipment out here. That could be the difference between 2 minutes. Or preparing and saying, hey, if this happens, we need someone at the end of the lane directing, because sometimes we arrive at these incidents, everybody wants to be hands-on, and it takes us 2 minutes to figure out exactly where to go. So, of course, having us out there for a night takes away from their time, and farmers are extremely busy, and we know that they're working long hours, but we have programs that can input all sorts of data into them. So anybody that were to listen to this and know somebody, in our area, or for Steve down in the Lancaster area, they can just send over information. We can upload that stuff. How tall are your silos or grain bins? How many are there? What times a year are you using them? Even notifications around that time. Hey, we loaded our silos last week, and we're going to be working in and around them for the next 2 weeks, and they're this tall. We have this many people working on the farm. You never think that that info is going to come in handy, but when something bad does happen, you think back to what all info could we have had that would have helped here. And that's oftentimes stuff that is really simple to convey to local responders. So yeah, just really being prepared both on their end and on our end for it.
Okay, great. Those are really excellent points to bring up. And yeah, I wasn't aware that you could do that. That makes a lot of sense. And I would encourage farmers to take advantage of doing that, to send that information to their local fire company if they can.
Yeah, even maps, plot plans, just showing us that way we're pulling up to the scene and I don't have to guess where am I going. I know we're making a left here, we're going down this far, and there's plenty of room for us to park in this area. Minutes,
Google
minutes may.
satellite images are good.
Yep. And it's something that any farmer around here could do, and it's no cost to anybody. We have these softwares, we use them for apartment buildings, commercial buildings. Why not use them for farms?
So sort of building on that, what you talked about different challenges, but do you have any thoughts on any unique challenges that you might face when responding to a call compared to other situations? Steve, do you have any thoughts there?
We keep mentioning that you farm emergencies are so unique, and we definitely can run into a lot of different hazards, and that's one thing that keeps coming up. So I jotted down some hazards here that we see most common. We have farm structures, we have gases, machinery, chemicals, and fertilizers. These are all things that are unique to the farms themselves. So we have to figure out how we address those coming into that situation. So some of the meters that we carry to detect gases that we would see in a residential area may not be able to pick up farm gases. So we need to have other ways to recognize that so that we can, protect ourselves with the proper PPE ahead of time. Some other things is the location of the incident. So Rob mentioned about pre-planning and having access available. It's not farmers in general, and I'm guilty of it too, are just we get distracted and we see something that needs done and we go out and do it, and we don't tell people where we're going and when we plan to be back. So that's one thing that we can do, is try to let someone know and say, if I'm not back by this time, send someone out to check on me. To go off of that too, they may not have address signs for different fields that farmers are going to be working in, or different locations. But if there's gates, if there's a way to either letter or number gates, so that we have a better idea that if an emergency happens while they're out, they can say, go down this road to gate 3, and come back the lane at gate 3. It just gives us a quicker response time to get help to the emergency that's taking place. So yeah, Rob, I don't know if you have anything to add on that.
No, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Is most of the things that we're dealing with on farms are unique to farms. We have gas meters that'll pick up all sorts of gases, but our normal gas call is propane, methane, carbon monoxide. Nitrogen dioxide is one that we ran into a couple years ago in a farm accident. And while I'm sure you could find that somewhere else in the world, you're most likely going to be seeing it on a farm as a rescuer. And that's not something that I'm going to be seeing in an apartment or a commercial store in our downtown district. So knowing what those hazards are, especially with equipment, we do some stuff in the fire department called man and machine training. And that's just an overarching sort of phrase for someone stuck in something, and there's a lot of implements that you're not seeing anywhere else, you know? So if we go to a farm, we're dealing with a lot of augers and PTOs and things that you can get stuck in pretty easily that we may not see in a lot of other applications. So we have to really just take what we know and gear that towards the current situation. But what's so unique is that it's always going to be different. You know, we go to a fire in a house, there's something different than the last house fire, but there's a lot of similarities. You go to an accident on a farm, you're going to draw far less similarities between that accident and the next accident or the accident before. So they're always just presenting very unique challenges.
And along with
Yes.
that, they can be very resource intensive. So the equipment that we see on farms is a lot stronger than the vehicles that we would cut apart at your typical vehicle accident. So it may be more of a disassembling type of thing than cutting and spreading that we're used to. So it may be a very long, drawn out process. So knowing, we always say, if you could have a mechanic that you can get a hold of, that's some of the best resources are other farmers or farm mechanics that can give you the details of the equipment that you're working on.
That makes sense too there. So building on that, what are some safety tips that you have working around equipment and grain bins? I'm sure this could be almost a whole podcast in itself, but do
Yeah.
you guys have any top level ideas there, suggestions?
Same theme we've been talking about the whole time is understanding the hazards. So one thing that I think would be really beneficial to people working around grain bins is seeing it from the other side, you know, attending a grain bin training. There's a lot of good trainings that are taught throughout the state. There's ag progress days, you know, out in Pine Grove Mills once a year where I know Steve used to bring and I'm sure someone still brings the grain bin simulator. You know, you may have worked around a grain bin for 50 years, but never actually seen someone suck down in one or know what that might look like or realize how difficult it is to actually get someone out of that. And knowing that backside of it may allow you to work more mindfully around it, you know, knowing what those hazards are. If you haven't seen what the end result can be, how are you supposed to know other than from hearing stories from people? And you hear some of those things so infrequently that you think, you know, that's not going to happen to me. So just understanding the hazards, you know, realizing that just because I was in this grain bin trying to break up clumps last week doesn't mean that this week is going to be the same and that I'm not going to fall through. Same thing goes with equipment. You know, when we get new equipment on farms, it's different than the last piece. There's nuance to everything and understanding the equipment and the hazards before we start using it. And there's really no better place to do that than at some of these, you know, trade shows or ag progress days where you're seeing sales reps selling their equipment. You're seeing ag safety show what could go wrong with the equipment. You're seeing different perspectives on everything because if you're only looking at it from one side, you're kind of unaware of all the risks associated.
Steve, do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I think Rob hit most of them. The other thing I will mention is a phrase called lockout tag out. That's one thing that we stress to farmers that are working around bins or maybe doing bin maintenance, things like that, is to make sure that all the power is de-energized. The lockout tag out procedure for us is we're actually physically putting a mechanism and a lock on a power source so that it can't be energized. And then that lock has a key that goes with the person performing the task so that it cannot be re-energized until that person is back from doing that. And a lot of people will say, I don't have that fancy kit or all the locks and things to do that. Well, a lockout tag out could just be placing someone by the on off switch or what have you and saying, you know, don't let anyone turn this on until we complete this task. So you don't really have to have all the fancy equipment. You can still perform that, just making sure that the energy is completely de-energized from the machine before someone goes inside of it. And the other things with grain, just making sure that there's no one working on top of trucks. That you can have grain transport vehicles. So it may not always be a grain bin. So it may be a grain transport vehicle. They're also very attractive for kids to play in. So just making sure that, like I said, we have a mix of heavy industry and a farm setting or a family setting. So just making sure that we look out for the little ones as well. far as moving this equipment around the yard, just watching for our blind spots. A lot of newer equipment has backup cameras in it that are very useful for monitoring, the hard to see areas. So those are just some things that we can do. There's retrofit kits for adding backup cameras to equipment or to grain trailers, things like that. So I would say those are the biggest ones, is just making sure that the equipment is de-energized, and if we can avoid getting in the bin altogether, zero entry into a grain bin is obviously the best preventative measure. And then also just watching out with those transport vehicles.
Switching gears a little bit to fire extinguishers, what are your suggestions for those? How many fire extinguishers should be on a farm and where should they be located? Let's see, Rob, will you take that one first?
Sure. In a farm setting, it's, a lot different than where we have standard instructions for homes, or apartment buildings where we would want one near cooking surfaces and near entrances and exits. Really, you want to just have fire extinguishers available at any point where you think that you may have equipment operating. Any entrance or exit to buildings is always a good one. I will defer to Steve because I'm not sure what the actual rules are for, enforcement on that, but it's never going to hurt to have them, especially around equipment that's operating. You know, uh, if you end up having a fire in a grain bin or a silo, a fire extinguisher is not really going to help you there. But a fire starting at a piece of equipment operating, could be put out with a fire extinguisher before it gets worse. So they should be serviced or at least inspected yearly. But as far as actual placement and rules and regulations, Steve might have some better input than me.
Yeah, that sounds pretty spot on. So just making sure that you have the fire extinguishers that are suitable for the right type of fire that you may encounter. So on some hay balers, you may see them carry a water can versus like your dry chem extinguishers. But as far as like inside of a structure, the NFPA, which is uh,
National Fire Protection Association.
they recommend 50 feet within inside of a structure or by the exits, as long as it doesn't interfere with the animal housing. So 50 feet may not be realistic depending on what the structure is, but certainly, like Rob mentioned, by the exits is a good place for them. And then, as he mentioned, inspecting them annually. You can do a glance over them kind of monthly just to make sure that there's no damage to them. They could be exposed to different elements being on a farm setting. And then just making sure, one thing that we see quite often is that the tube on the fire extinguisher for the dry chem, they will often collect dust or debris or spider webs, things like that. So just making sure that they're clear and able to be operated.
Okay, those are all really good points. Steve, you mentioned having them on like with hay baling equipment, but what about on tractors? Would you recommend all tractors have fire extinguishers, or what's your recommendation there?
Yeah, I would say a small fire extinguisher on all your vehicles is definitely be very beneficial if you're ever in need of one.
So do you have any suggestions for farmers about first aid and or CPR? Rob, would you like to take this
Yeah,
one first?
farmers or anybody on planet Earth, I think can benefit from training in that. First aid, that covers so much that it's tough to really put everything into a short class. But short first aid classes, especially like stop the bleed classes, are really beneficial. You know, fixing up scrapes and cuts isn't going to save anybody's life, but knowing how to apply a tourniquet, knowing how to stabilize somebody's airway to make sure that they're breathing. There's a lot of interventions that we're not going to be able to, or farmers aren't going to be able to do in the field without the proper equipment, but knowing basics, like we talk about the ABCs of first aid, and that's airway, breathing, and circulation. So if they have an airway obstruction, trying to clear that, or trying to, give them a what we would call a patent airway so that they're sitting up and they have the ability to breathe, breathing, making sure that if their airway is, intact, and we've given their airway an opportunity to function, that now they're breathing. So whether that's us breathing for them with a bag valve mask or old school, mouth to mouth, And then circulation. So if their circulation's cut off, trying to allow their blood to circulate, or if they're in cardiac arrest, circulating it for them by pumping on their chest. So really just knowing the basics can really can get you far. And as far as CPR goes, there's something that's done now called high efficiency CPR, where they found that it's more important just to have immediate and continuous compressions than it is to get breaths or be doing mouth to mouth. That's not to say that that's not the proper way to do CPR, but in a one rescuer scenario, what's most important is keeping their blood pumping by just pumping on their chest. So rapid application of an AED and the proper equipment is important, but in the absence of that, because obviously it's not always available, or if you're by yourself, it may not be feasible for you to get that equipment right away. Um, Rapid deployment of chest compressions, which is something that anybody can do by taking a 2-hour class, could really save someone's life. That's the difference in it's a difference of seconds. So yeah, I really think all people everywhere, especially those working in a potentially dangerous setting like on a farm, should have some first aid background, and especially CPR, and all of that can be accomplished in a 4-hour class at your local fire station, EMS station, or for a larger farm, even calling and scheduling one to come to your location.
Steve, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'll just mention too, Rob got all the main ones there. The Stop the Bleed program is another one that's being offered, and that's a good program that talks about bleeding control specifically. And I know we did that at Ag Progress Days a couple of years ago, where we had some instructors come out to Ag Progress Days and they offered the class to those in attendance. So absolutely, first aid and CPR is by far some of the best training that anyone can get. And it's kind of funny too, because when we think about first responders, we often think about the fire department or EMTs, right? But in reality, the first responder could just be another family member that's showing up on the scene first. And I know in Lancaster County, it may, depending on what part of the county you're in, it could be quite some time before we're able to get an ambulance or a medic to the scene, just because of the call volume and the location of the incident. So there is a chance that it could be, quite a while before actual help arrives. So if we can provide care through just basic first aid, bleeding control, and CPR, that could make the difference between a life and death situation.
Thank you for adding that. Where do you suggest farmers go to resources on farm safety? I know you both mentioned some different courses, but where would you suggest farmers get started?
So I'm obviously an advocate for the Penn State Farm Safety Team, but any reputable source for farm safety or safety in general that could be applied to the farm operation. I know there's a lot of questions about, maybe farm specific. Where can I get some questions answered on that? And I would say reach out to Penn State Ag Safety and Health, and they have some excellent resources available on farm hazards and how to mitigate those, how you can do farm safety topics on low cost budgets. And if they have specific questions about their farming operation, they'll definitely be able to get them into the right direction to the people that can answer their questions.
Okay, thank you. Rob, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just like Steve said, I mean that you have a lot of local groups, ag extension groups, but if you don't know where to reach out, just reaching out to local first responders, they'll at least get you steered in the right direction. Whether it's an impromptu class for them to come out and sort of survey your area and pre-plan, or have those first responders let you know what they think would be most beneficial to them in an emergency scenario, or actually having, a real state class come in, like man and machine classes or grain bin rescue. And, even though they're not equipped with all those tools, having that understanding of what first responders will do or what they could do before first responders arrive is huge. So yeah, there's a lot of good programs out there, but if you're not sure where to go, starting with local first responders, because they'll steer you in the right direction.
So to wrap up here, Steve, I'll have you take this one first. What are your top one or two take-home messages about farm safety that you'd like to share with our listeners?
I guess my biggest thing is to prioritize safety overall. A lot of times it gets bypassed because we talk about the time and cost commitment to safety, but I promise that the investing in safety ahead of time will greatly outweigh any kind of costs and downtime that would occur if some incident happened on the farm. So if we can prioritize safety, invest in the safety, we're going to be much further ahead than we would if we do have an incident occur. And just with that, consider the risk versus the benefit. Obviously, if it's going to be too risky, then we just avoid the task altogether or figure out a different way to accomplish it. And then obviously working with first responders ahead of time can greatly improve any kind of outcome if an incident was to occur. Rob, do you have anything to?
Yeah, I totally agree. The number one thing just has to be prevention. Having safety plans in place, making sure that everybody on the farm understands what could happen, signs, indications that something might happen, and really knowing the risks associated, not just knowing that, hey, if you remove this guard or you do this, something bad could happen. Understanding truly why are we saying this? Why are we practicing these safety measures? They put into perspective why safety is important. And then second to safety, because if safety doesn't work, we have to realize that we become complacent really, really easily. So we should have all of these safety measures in place to prevent complacency because, being absent-minded about something, we could still be safe if we're being absent-minded if the right stops are in place. But if the right stops aren't in place and we're absent-minded and just acting like it can't be us today, that's when bad things happen. So yeah, really just prevention first and foremost, and then realizing that we can do everything we can to prevent something, but if we get complacent, bad things can happen.
I appreciate all of that you all shared today. So thank you for being here with us today and talking with us. And thank you to all of our listeners. If you have any further questions about this topic, please feel free to email me at djr6158@psu.edu. This wraps up our podcast today and our series on farm safety. Be sure to tune in for our next episode airing April 29th, where dairy educator Emily Fred will be discussing the impact of HPAI on dairy markets. Thanks for listening.